Of all the Trump tell-alls in the last 3 years, there's never been a book like this.
What would you do today if you passed him on the street?
I don't want to get myself in trouble.
That's okay, get yourself in trouble.
There's a reason I'm always wearing 2 masks and sunglasses.
Say more about your grandfather.
The most fundamental thing to know about my grandfather is that he was a sociopath. It was this very strange tension between having this extraordinarily wealthy family on the one hand, for whom money meant everything. It's not like, one part of the family earned all of this money and the rest of us just kind of were terrible at making money.
Hey family, welcome to the show. I'm Carlos Watson. Really excited about our guest today, Marielle Trump. She's a psychologist and author, best known, of course, for being the niece of former President Donald Trump, of whom she's been extremely critical over the years. In fact, her 2020 book about the Trump family, entitled Too Much and Never Enough, comes with the following subtitle: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. Now, the book would go on to sell nearly 1 million copies on just the first day of its release. Well, now she's back with something of a follow-up to that book with a new one. It's entitled The Reckoning, Our Nation's Trauma and Finding a Way to Heal. And it's the subject of our conversation today. Take a peek at my conversation with New York's own Marielle Trump. Hey, Mary.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Where are you?
I was on Long Island for a long time. So I just moved into Soho, which I'm very happy about.
When was the last time you talked to your uncle?
The last time I spoke to him was also the last time I saw him. It was in April of 2017 when I went to the White House for my aunt's birthday party. And that was also the first time I'd seen him in about 9 years. The last time I saw him before Ivanka's wedding in 2009 was at a deposition, because that's how my family spends time, apparently, suing each other and deposing each other.
And so what's it like when you guys see each other?
The last time I saw Donald is, for the first time in my life, he gave me a hug, which was really quite something. Not a physically affectionate family, but he also lied to me. The very first thing he said when he saw me as I was walking into the dining room was, "I specifically asked for you to be invited," which isn't true. But it was sweet of him to think of me after the fact.
When you think about your uncle, and I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah.
How do you think about him now?
He's definitely not complicated. And I think his talents, such as they are completely accidents of birth. Like, he's good at things like cheating. He doesn't have what you or I would consider real marketable skills necessarily.
What if I said to you, look, becoming president of the United States is a super hard thing. You have to have a ton of talents, and cheating by itself probably isn't enough. I do assume to make it to the presidency, there's got to be some meaningful set of talents.
I'm not saying that we should underestimate him. I think it is completely fair to say that he is somebody who has charisma. I don't find his charisma appealing, but plenty of other people do.
Why do you think he won and came within 44,000 votes of winning again?
Well, the first thing I think when you say that is we have to get rid of the Electoral College because it is crazy that a 44,000 vote swing would have completely erased the votes of 8 million people.
What would you do today if you passed him on the street?
I don't want to get myself in trouble.
That's okay, get yourself in trouble.
I feel so much rage towards him that I'm not entirely sure what I would do. I would do my best not to make it a physical confrontation, but I would be really hard pressed not to tell him that I think he's just a total failure and loser. But it wouldn't be a constructive conversation.
Ivanka, how close are you to her?
We've never been close. She's 16 years younger. I really only ever saw them on major holidays. So, I don't have an opinion of her based on family connection at all. But from what I've seen, She seems to be somebody with no real convictions. She seems to have very little, if any, self-awareness. And I don't know if you've noticed, but she and her husband seem to have dropped out of sight. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were just thinking, we'll lay low and then everybody will forget about all the horrible things we did and we can just reemerge and be accepted into New York's high society again.
Mary, what do you think happens to your uncle from here?
He's older and he's in less good shape than President Biden for sure. So I think that's going to take more of a toll as the years pass. He's involved at the moment in at least 3 major lawsuits, one of which is mine, and at least 3 criminal investigations.
Top elections officials calling for a criminal investigation into potential election interference by Donald Trump and his allies.
Of indictments derived from these allegations of a years-long multi-million-dollar criminal tax fraud scheme.
Now, 2 Capitol Hill police officers suing the former president. They allege that he incited the January 6th insurrection.
There's a possibility that he's going to be too busy defending himself in court or too busy giving depositions to stay engaged politically. What I'm deeply concerned about right now is the direction the Republican Party seems to be going in. They have had so many opportunities to take the off-ramp away from Donald Trump, and they have never, ever done it.
What do folks say to you on the street when you meet supporters of your uncle?
There's a reason I'm always wearing 2 masks and sunglasses. I literally can't remember the last time I had a conversation with somebody who supported Donald. In 2016, I had plenty of Republican friends who voted for him. And yeah, I mean, it hurt my feelings, quite honestly, because they knew the role he'd played in my life. But it was a political decision for them, and it wasn't any of my business. But now we can't pretend that we don't know what his character is. So people who still support him are people I honestly don't want to be around.
Mary, go back for me a little bit and tell me about growing up.
I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, which was about a 10-minute bike ride from my grandparents' house, which was in Jamaica Estates. Jamaica and Jamaica Estates are about as different as 2 places could be. Jamaica Estates was, like, I think back then, 100% white, 100% Christian, and very upper middle class. My grandparents lived in a mansion. I grew up in an apartment building in Jamaica in this probably 70% Black and 30% white. I took the subway to school every day and I felt right at home there. And I never quite understood why my family was so racist.
And did you have money growing up? Did your family have money?
I wanted for nothing. I went to private schools. I went to a sailing camp. We lived in one of my grandfather's buildings, which was not in particularly good shape. And my mother, I didn't know this at the time, of course, but was given very, very little money. I think she had about $600 a month with which to buy her clothes and buy food. It was this very strange tension between having this extraordinarily wealthy family on the one hand, for whom money meant everything, and having a mom who had to keep a running tally of the 5s and the 10s she took out of the envelope of cash that she used for our necessities. We couldn't go on vacation without getting permission. Looking back, it's just insane.
Your dad was not in the house?
No, he left when I was 2.5. He lived in Sunnyside, Queens, which wasn't too far away, also in one of my grandfather's buildings. He was an alcoholic, and he was in really bad shape.
You have a grandfather and grandmother who have lots of money, and the name by that point probably is famous, at least in New York.
In New York, yeah.
And where does this put a young girl? Does it make you proud and confident? Does it make you frustrated that I'm not living in a mansion?
Oh, it didn't have any impact, honestly, partially because My grandfather had been a known quantity in Brooklyn and Queens well before my existence. When Donald started to be getting known outside of New York and anybody asked me if I were related, I just said no because it was easier. It isn't just that, we were the relatives from the wrong side of the tracks, even though, by the way, I was a grandchild. I wasn't a third cousin. My grandfather in particular created this myth that Donald was the success and he was this brilliant businessman who had become fabulously wealthy all by himself. While my dad was living in Sunnyside, Queens, like he was impoverished. The thing I didn't know at the time, but learned later, which made me extraordinarily angry, is that it was all smoke and mirrors. Every cent Donald had was from my grandfather. So he's living this incredibly extravagant lifestyle. My grandfather had essentially made my father irrelevant in the business and promoted Donald over him, even though Donald was 8 years younger and had no experience. So it's not like, one part of the family earned all of this money and the rest of us just kind of were terrible at making money. So why should they share? Because it's theirs. It's that my grandfather just decided that he was only going to put his money in one place and the rest of us could just, fend for ourselves.
Say more about your grandfather.
The most fundamental thing to know about my grandfather is that he was a sociopath. No real depth of human feeling. He had no hobbies. Everything was his business. Everything was making more money. And then eventually Donald, I guess, became his hobby, promoting Donald and making sure Donald had all the fame and the success. Was he a good businessman? Yeah. When he died, his estate was worth something like $1 billion. So clearly he'd had some success. But the other thing really important to remember about him too is that he was the recipient of huge amounts of government funding. Because when he started building, it was in, post-war America. So there were federal housing authority grants being given. My grandfather was very closely connected to the Brooklyn Democratic Party. So he had people making sure that money was getting funneled his way for his projects. The worst thing about him is that he basically destroyed all 5 of his children. But from a business perspective, it's that despite all of that government largesse, he hated paying taxes and did everything in his power not to.
And so years later, you say that you were the source behind getting the tax returns out there that showed that former President Trump had effectively paid little or no taxes for most of the last decade plus. Is that right?
The court has decided it will not block a grand jury in New York City from seeing the former president's personal and corporate tax records.
The piece I was involved with was more about the fact that over the course of his lifetime, my grandfather had gifted Donald like $410 million. So it was to debunk all of the myths Donald had told about himself that he was some self-made man, which of course he wasn't.
If you were right and your uncle has committed crimes, what does that say to you that, that nothing's happened?
If you're rich, connected, and white, and male, probably, you can do things with impunity. The only thing you can say is that, the system is quite obviously rigged. I mean, it's just extraordinary how we prioritized one kind of crime over another, even though I think white-collar crime is the nonviolent crime that has the biggest negative impact on our culture.
Mary, tell me about your new book. What made you do the second book?
I wanted to try to figure out how we got to this place in our history where we are so susceptible to incompetent, cruel leaders like Donald. Why so many of us are perfectly happy aligning ourselves with a political party that, quite frankly, is fascist at this point. I felt like trying to figure out that might get us to a place where we could face some hard truths and maybe, hopefully, heal from there. Because if you're somebody who suffered from trauma, you're never cured, right? But you don't learn how to mitigate the effects of it unless you face what happened to you, which is a really difficult thing to do. And we need to do that as a country. We need to face squarely the fact that since this country's inception, two things have kept us from realizing our potential. One is our failure time after time after time to hold powerful white men accountable. And the other is that white supremacy has been something that has run through the course of our history and is now currently actually one of the platforms of one of our two major political parties. And I'm not entirely sure when it became okay for adult human beings not to take responsibility for their actions. And that seems to be where we are. So I thought it was important to be really honest about where we came from and where we are, and hope that people are willing to take that message in without getting defensive.
Mary, do you mind, as we wrap up, if I do a little rapid fire with you?
Of course.
What's your favorite movie of all time?
Lawrence of Arabia and Alien.
Your karaoke song?
Something by The Who.
Most interesting person you've ever met?
David Rothkopf of Deep State Radio is a really fascinating guy.
If I gave you the do-over button in life and I gave you one do-over, what would you use it on?
I would have gotten my PhD in English literature and started writing novels.
What kind of novels?
The two greatest American writers are William Faulkner and Toni Morrison. So that's what I like.
If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would you love to have dinner with?
I'd love to have dinner with Meryl Streep.
I know you've got a beautiful, wonderful 19-year-old. What's the most interesting thing you've ever learned about parenting?
That it's all about them.
Most interesting thing you've learned in this life about love?
It's hard, but worth it.
She's holding so much responsibility for him, you can tell. She's holding our what has happened to the nation, and I hope that she can get some relief.
I think anyone that has a set of convictions and they're willing to stand up for it is huge. Most people will never do that because there's a huge cost that they need to pay. And I think, she's like, I don't care.
For me, growing up and having family be a whole lot of like my foundation of who I am, and having to deal with that on such a personal level, I don't know if I would be able to react and even be brave enough to bring it up to them and hold them accountable. And I think that's what I really admired about this conversation.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Marielle Trump. What an interesting and fascinating person. Surprised to some extent what she had to say about what she would do if she crossed paths with her uncle. Maybe I'm not surprised, but powerful to hear her say that. And interesting to hear her talk about growing up in that Queens, that Jamaica Queens of long ago. All right, listen, thanks as always for watching The Carlos Watson Show. Be sure to tune in every weekday. We got a good new episode for you every weekday. You never know who's going to turn up on the show. Be safe, be well. We'll see you on the other side.